Hey, Rick, what did you eat last night?
Oh, I went out with a friend, and we went out to one of my favorite French restaurants in the neighborhood. So I just love restaurants because I tend to eat very well. I'm sure it has nothing to do, because I can't eat well at other restaurants, Kate. It's all the restaurant's fault. But this restaurant was really great. I had a watercress salad, which just had golden beets on it, and it had like a sherry vinaigrette, and that was really beautiful. And then they did this sauteed rockfish. And rockfish is one of those fish you can get fresh around here in the Maryland, D.C. area. So they sauteed it really well, but then they just threw it on top of this whole pile of like bok choy, soba noodles. It had carrots, it had cashews, it had jalapenos. And I think if I remember correctly, it was all in like some type of coconut, ginger, lemongrass broth. So it just tasted wonderful. And I'm like, I would eat fish every night if it was prepared like this.
And I don't think of that as being particularly French. That's interesting.
Yeah, right?
But I guess the
I was
French...
so in love with it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, sounds delish.
How about you?
I finally figured out what basted eggs are. And
Kate,
I discovered that I like them.
What the heck are basted eggs?
Well, so basted eggs are basically fried eggs that you don't have to flip over, which means you don't have to break the yolk, but you still can get them all entirely cooked at the top so that the white is cooked through. And if you want, you can cook the top of the yolk through if you prefer that kind of thing. So you just do fried eggs on a low temperature and you cover them. You put a lid on it. And so the steam baste them. Now, you could put fat in there. You could use bacon fat or butter, and you could even flip it on top of it. If you've ever seen chefy people like spoon the fat onto the egg, like that would be a way to do it. Or you could just cover it, and the condensation just rains down on the egg, and it cooks the top that way.
Nice. I like that idea a lot.
Especially since when I make a fried egg, the whole reason I'm making it is because I want the yolk to run on something.
Yeah.
So I make sure I don't break it that way because I don't do so well with the flipping of the eggs. I often break the yolk otherwise.
Me too. Did you put the egg on anything?
I did. I pulled a bunch of stuff.
What'd you put it on, Kate?
I pulled a bunch of stuff out of the fridge. I might have even talked about this in one of the podcasts. I made some farro, and I had some leftover Mexican black bean sauce that I had made earlier in the week for chilaquiles. And then I made some braised greens, and I mixed all those three things together, and then I put the egg on top, and boy, was it good.
Ugh, that sounds so good. I want some now.
Yeah, I do too. It was awesome.
Hello and welcome to another episode of You Won't Believe What I Ate Last Night. I am Rick Fiore.
And I'm Kate DeVore.
And this is our ongoing conversation about food, health, weight management, and our endeavor to be and stay healthy in a really tasty world.
With love, kindness, and compassion towards ourselves and others.
Today we are talking about beer. Beer, people. This is part 2 of our 3-part series from Round Barn Winery. Part 1 was all about wine, so if you haven't listened to that, make sure you check that out. You can find that link on our website. And we have part 3 coming up, which is going to be all about liquor. So, Kate, how did you like our beer experience?
I felt very, very brave because I do not like beer. And I was determined that I was going to participate in the tasting no matter what. And it was so much fun. I liked it, so really much more than I expected. Really had a blast learning about it. Really had fun trying to pick out the different notes in the beer, and it was really possible. It's not like I've ordered beer since. It's still not going to be a choice of mine, but I felt really good that I was able to engage in the way that I did. It was really fun.
It was fun watching you try all the beers, I have to say.
And it was fun watching you finish them after I tasted them.
That was really fun. And we actually did beer last. We did the wine tasting, then the liquor tasting, and then we ended with beer. So that by the time we got to the beer section, we were like, this is all really good. Love it.
Yeah, the guys at Round Barn are so completely awesome. We were so happy to go up there and get their expertise. And we have their information on our website, and you can find them.
drinkmichigan.com/round-barn.
Yeah, Round Barn is an awesome winery up there, and obviously distillery and other things too. So if you're in the neighborhood or if you're looking for a fun trip, we recommend you check it out. You can also check out our own website, which is youwon'tbelievewhatIate.com, and you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. Oh, subscribe on iTunes and YouTube.
And as always, send us your comments and thoughts and questions. And as always, please enjoy the show.
So, who are you and what do you do here?
My name is Malcolm Wyman, and I'm the head brewer at the Round Barn Public House.
All right.
And my name is Chris Morse, and I am one of the partners of Intant Spirits, which is the parent company for Round Barn Free Run Cellars in the Public House.
Excellent.
So you don't do much here then?
No, not at all.
You just waltz around, drinking your cocktails.
I'm in charge of quality control.
He's a hanger-on.
That's right.
Quality control.
What did you eat last night?
Actually, I think I had too much of quality control, and I'm not sure I ate last night. And I have young children, so I think I was actually in bed by about 7:30 last night.
Oh my God.
Maybe there was a Cheerio in there
Right.
or something.
Or chicken nuggets. who
There you
knows?
go.
My kingdom to not think about to forget about eating before I go to bed.
Malcolm, how about you?
I had a delicious lamb burger with tzatziki, cucumber sauce, and truffle fries.
Yum.
So yes, it was good.
So I came to beer when I was in high school. First time I ever drank. I went to a party at my sister Helen's, and I got so drunk with her friends. I'm like drunk, you go in the bathroom, you throw up, you come back, and you're still drinking.
Yeah.
And I went off beer for years, and it was probably like, whatever's in a bottle, but at that time. And then, Kate, how do you feel about beer?
I have tried desperately to like beer my entire life, and it's the only alcohol I don't like. I don't like bitter.
Okay.
And I think beer tends to be bitter. I think it might be the hops is what I've isolated as something that I don't like, because I like bourbon and whiskey that I've learned have a similar mash, right? There's a lot of similarities. So I think it's the hops that I don't care for. So I'm really excited, and I'm going to do my best, but understand that
Well, there may be
I've
one
never
or two
liked
in here
beer.
that we stay away from for you, then.
Oh, I'm going to taste them. I'm
Right.
going to taste them anyway,
Right.
because I'm game, but I have to confess, I'm not a fan.
And after all these years, what I love about coming back to beer is there's so many varieties now. There's
Oh my
so many
God.
choices of when I first tasted beer that I really loved it. And what I love about this is I love drinking beer with people that know beer. That's when I'm the happiest, because they're just like, do this. So that's sort of one of my questions is, when you go into a bar that says, or a place that has so many beer choices, what's the best piece of advice you can give someone to be like, how do you sort through sort of the old versus the new, sort of the traditional versus the contemporary? You know what I mean?
It's kind of what you're in the mood for. I would say I think that's the biggest part about it. The other thing is, are you just drinking or are you eating with it? Because much like wine, I mean, you can really treat beer very similar to the way most people treat wine. You're looking for things that pair well with, what you're hungry for. So that's kind of always how I start the conversation. How are you consuming this?
That makes sense.
If you're just kind of drinking it on your own and you want something light and refreshing, then you're going to want to probably gravitate more towards like a lager style or a light ale style of beer. Those tend to be very much malt driven, so kind of bready tasting.
Slightly sweeter.
Yeah, and they don't have a lot of hops. They have a little bit just to balance the mid palate out, but it's not the dominant profile of them. And they tend to finish very clean, and so there's not a lot of kind of residual there. Now, if and those are nice to pair things like lighter fare off of, because they're not kind of real aggressive. They're easy to enjoy.
Do we have one of those here?
We do. Actually, the first one here is the Kolsch.
Yeah.
That's kind of our flagship.
This one?
Yep.
Yes.
That's our flagship beer.
So what do we do when we taste it? Is it like wine? Do you look at it? You don't swill it, obviously. What are you supposed to do?
Okay, so I actually went out of my way to print off our beer
Smells like
training, and I'm going to use the sort of material that we have that we're teaching our staff to sort of encourage you to drink the beer a certain way.
Okay.
Malcolm is so prepared for
I
this
know.
interview.
He is organized.
He has
So-
an entire clipboard.
It's a whole clipboard of tasting.
Yeah,
Okay. So there's a couple ways to look at beer or examine beer. And there's quantitative things that we can measure, but there are many things about beer that are qualitative that we cannot measure. The quantitative, for example, ABV, alcohol by volume, which is the alcohol content of your beverage, and then IBU, which is the International Bitterness Unit. The IBU can give a quantitative, measured idea of bitterness. So if you see something has 70 IBUs, it's pretty bitter. If you see something has 10 IBUs,
Interesting.
it's not as bitter. Our Kolsch, for example, is 12 IBUs. It's not bitter at all.
I'm optimistic.
Kolsch has more of that lighter Pilsen notes. It's made with Pilsen malt, so you're not going to get an intense roasty character or caramel character. You're mostly going to get the lighter bread notes or biscuit notes in the beer.
All right,
Go in. Kate's going in.
So as far as aroma, we do a drive-by with the glass, move horizontally in front of your nose and inhale. Take a deep sniff. What kind of aromas do you get? Are they floral? Are they vegetal? Are they hoppy? There's other types of bready aromas. So then, as far as flavor,
What is hop?
Hop is a plant. It's actually very genetically close to marijuana. Actually, they're kind of like cousins, and so it has that.
It's a weed.
Yeah, it's a weed.
I could drink that if I had to.
If I did.
I will even have another sip of it. That's pretty
And the
good.
reason you
It's
don't
mild,
have to
it's
swirl
subtle.
beer like you do wine is because it's carbonated.
Right.
So it naturally pushes the aroma out of the glass.
So CO2 infused within the beer will help to
Cool.
bring out the flavor and aroma qualities that we want.
Okay.
If you take a drink, swish it in your mouth, swallow it, note what it tastes like. Take another sip and exhale with the beer in your mouth. Inhale and then exhale with the beer in your mouth, and then swallow as you exhale. It's an unusual sensation, but it is part of the way to drink beer. As you exhale, it really brings out a lot of the aroma and feeling flavor in your cheeks.
I've never done that before.
So it's slightly different with wine than it is with beer, but if you are willing to sort of try that, then you'll notice that a lot of the malt character and hop character comes out way more prominently with that slight exhale while you swallow.
So hops are bitter. Malt is fill in the blank.
Malt is sweet.
Malt is sweet.
There are 4 ingredients in beer. There's malt, water, of course, hops, and yeast.
What's barley?
Barley is part of the malt. There are many types of malt. Barley is included. Not all malts are.
For the record, I just had a third sip. Just
There you
so
go.
we know.
That's good.
I
I'm
like
glad
it.
you're enjoying it.
It's good. What is a lager versus an ale?
Okay, that's a great question. An ale is a top fermenting yeast, and a lager is a bottom fermenting yeast. That might not make much sense, but the difference is all beers are split into those 2 categories. Every single beer in the world is either an ale or a lager.
Oh.
There was a time historically, up until about the 18th century, where ale was kind of a commonly used term for middle class beer or peasant beer. Ale was, not something that was conventionally consumed by the wealthy. Whereas now we see a difference in definitions because of yeast. When Pasteur developed the ability to isolate yeast strains, and we began to understand that there was a microorganism at work within the beer, we began to choose how the microorganism, what microorganism we would use and how it would work, and what compounds it needed in order to succeed or thrive. And so a lot of different regions in the world have different styles of yeast. I just ordered a yeast from the Thames Valley. which is a really interesting, but I didn't order it from the Thames Valley. It was isolated from yeast that was collected in the Thames Valley and grown in a lab. And, the same with Belgian styles, the same with Saison styles. There's different yeast strains that create different characters.
And we're naturally occurring to these specific regions. Correct. Like it was part of the fauna or flora.
So it can totally change the beer.
And that's why
depending on season even.
That and water, the water plays a huge role as far as like what styles of beer were historically made in different regions. So we are actually exclusively at this point an ale house.
Yeah.
So we yes.
These are all ales.
These are all ales.
We don't make any lagers, but
Top fermenting.
Now
Let's move on to another tasting.
Okay.
So keep asking questions.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, he can keep talking while you keep
I could
drinking.
talk forever.
Right, yeah.
So
I'm just not trying to drink, Malcolm. I really do want to hear what you have to say.
well, let's try the wood. How about this? This is
wood. So what is this?
The wood IPA is, in my opinion, an excellent beer. She has a little distaste in her face.
Here comes the bitter.
Kate's smelling. Smelling.
Well, it's not just bitterness
But
as
it
well.
smells flowery.
Correct. That would be the oak that we have in the
I
beer.
like oak in wine.
Oak flower is a nice additive to this beer. We don't add it in the brewing process. We add it in the fermentation process. We allow the yeast to consume that substrate, and it really lends a floral palate.
It's super
to the beer.
flowery.
Yes.
It tastes flowery.
That's a great smell.
But bitter flowers.
Yeah.
I would like it better if it weren't bitter.
Well,
Like most things in life.
right. It does taste like a bitter flower, and that's something that that's good that you pick out that character because that's what we want.
Yeah, well,
Whether you like it or not.
yeah, that's just a matter of
can't do
taste.
anything.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
Malcolm, how do you stay healthy in a really tasty world?
Well, that's a challenging question because I make beer and I drink a lot of beer. But
And yet you appear very fit.
yes, well, I'm a martial artist. I practice Kung Fu and Tai Chi. And so there's a balance between, my work life, which is also my drinking life, and then also my personal life, which is where I spend a lot of time practicing and training and keeping up with my routines. And I teach a class as well, so
cool.
I'm able to keep other people fit too. So
It's funny. So it's like backwards. You do your drinking at work.
pretty
Not
much, yeah.
after work.
Almost, yeah. I do my drinking at 9 a.m. And then
HR.
How do we get this job?
Right, yeah,
I
exactly.
gotta learn how to brew beer.
I knew there'd be a catch.
Right, okay. Damn.
But, and there's a balance, healthy life, exercise, diet, and plenty of sleep. So, meditation as well, if you consider
nice.
that part of it. So.
And so, how do you do it with love and compassion toward yourself and others?
Well, as far as as far as beer making goes, beer is all about providing love to someone. Being able to make beer that someone else can enjoy, being able to make beer that I can come out to the front of the house, I can pour a sample of my beer, give it to someone who's never seen me before, never had that beer before, has never even been to the place before, and have them enjoy it. There's a lot of love there that happens, and there's a lot of
beautiful.
inspiration that happens for me because it's all about what the consumer wants in many ways. But if I can make something that I like and that I think is good, and I give it to someone and they like it and they think it's good, but it goes beyond what they thought they would like, then I've done my job. And as far as exercise and all that, I love my students. I have Kung Fu students and Tai Chi students, and they all, we have a great relationship in the art, and so there's a balance there as well with the compassion and love that you need to have for your student, as well as the sort of discipline that you need to have in order to keep up with it. So there's a balance, of course, but with my life as far as beer making, beer has always been a source of joy for me. So it's not just about drinking it and getting plastered and having a good time. It's also about being able to provide people with that really great, exceptional experience. So it's
Right.
That's lovely. And that's what the food experts say about food, too.
Yes.
It's all the same.
Absolutely.
It's about loving it and caring about it and nourishing yourself and other people with it.
if it wasn't for me and the other men that are involved in making this beer and the love that we have for the product that we create, then nobody else would enjoy it.
Is it all boys here?
No.
Well, we
Well,
have
in the brewery right now there is, but like I would say more than half of our staff is women.
Just curious.
No. It's we.
Just because everyone we've interviewed has been men.
Well,
Yeah, on this side,
In the
but then you go to the
production
retail side, and and
But
it's
on the
almost-
production side, it's mostly men.
correct.
Yes.
And
That's
the
interesting.
interesting thing about the industry is that there are more women getting into the industry, and there's a lot of women who are extremely talented. Of course, there is a disparity with the way that women are treated as far as money and so on and so forth in this country. It's inevitable. I'm a feminist, so I recognize that. But one of the other things about that is women originally pioneered the creation of beer. If it wasn't for women, we would not have beer. In the early
Makes sense.
ages, in the Middle Ages, we would have, Trappist ales and Belgian ales and beer brewed by monks, and it was nuns who were doing the work, women who were doing the work. Brewing beer in the community, yes, this is a good one.
What is this
So,
one we're tasting?
No, this is the Orinoco.
This would be Orinoco Cocoa.
Right. And
So
These are the biggest tastings ever, people. These glasses.
You don't have to
these are only
finish
4
them.
ounces.
You don't have to drink all 6 of them by yourself.
And just to finish up a quick note about women, one of the things that I find fascinating is that women as a whole have better palates than
They do.
Really?
Like that's been
Very much
scientifically proven. Like
Nice.
there's more what they consider super tasters, and this comes from my knowledge on the wine side, but it carries over because if
Right.
if you can taste one, you can taste the other. So that's kind of and we're excited because that's really expanding.
Now your
And-
style?
I thought I was going to like this because it was chocolate, but it's more bitter.
Do you smell anything?
Well,
that's
chocolate.
I don't smell much of anything
Now,
at all.
chocolate
And it's
malt
dark
lends
chocolate.
bitterness, and dark chocolate is a bitter product,
That's
of course.
true, it is.
So,
Would you get a smell off of this?
now,
So this is
there's-
a different smell because
Right.
this beer's on nitrogen. Okay, so it doesn't
It's
push it
Guinnessy.
like. What's
Yes,
that?
correct.
It
It has a
looks-
Guinness
yeah.
type of quality.
Yeah, totally.
Which creates
Yeah.
a smoothness and eliminates some of the roastiness. If that beer was a CO2 beer, which we have available in bottles, we have this on nitro on draft, and then in bottles we have it with CO2 infusion. And the CO2
Now I
infused
smell it.
flavors
Okay.
are more complicated, more roasty. You get more of the chocolate malt variety. But then on the nitro, it smooths out that roastiness, and you get more of that dark chocolate bitterness from the actual chocolate itself.
And almost like an espresso characteristic.
Correct.
Which comes from the heavily roasted malts.
I get the espresso. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get
And
it through
so
tasting. Yeah.
The chocolate really on this beer for me comes through on the finish. So as you kind of sit there, it goes from this kind of espresso dark coffee characteristic to this kind of more of a dark chocolate, with and being a nitro or nitrogen, being pushed with nitrogen, it that adds a creaminess to it. So
Absolutely.
Opinion on bottle versus tap
tap,
Versus can.
versus can.
tap.
All
It's
the way.
always best right off the tap.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Especially if you're at the place that makes it.
Right.
What's the best advice you've ever gotten about food and health?
Well, I think it would have to be what I said earlier about the balance between eating right and enjoying yourself, drinking and enjoying yourself, and plenty of sleep.
plenty
You
of
got to
sleep,
exercise, diet, exercise, sleep. Any of
Yeah.
those things, there's a balance between them, and if you're not balancing those things, then there's something missing in your life. And if you don't get enough sleep, you get sick. If you don't eat right, you get sick. If you don't exercise, you get sick. That's how it works. And there's a balance between them.
That's great. Which one should we do next?
So this one would be, I think I would jump back down to this. This is what we call Old Rye Goodness. And so this is a rye-based beer.
Old
Old
rye.
Rye.
Old rye goodness.
Old
That's a great
Rye Goodness. So this is going to be a toned down version kind of the Orinoco Stout. Now this is not pushed with nitrogen, but and this also has a rye base, which is a little bit of a spicy characteristic. If you're familiar with like rye whiskeys, they have this kind of underlying spicy note to it. That's you'll pick up a bit of a spicy characteristic in this beer as well.
Yeah.
Kate, how's that sitting?
I like it much better. It's less bitter. It's
Yeah.
less heavy. It's less, which,
Right.
yeah, it's lighter.
And too much rye can create a lot of bitterness. So there's a balance inside that
Well,
beer.
well done.
So, a lot
Ooh,
of the
that's
darker.
tasty.
Yeah, that's a good one. So
Yeah.
a brown ale, not a stout, but a brown ale. A rye brown ale like that, it has a very strong balance with the rye characters and not as much roasted malts. So we get a lot of the sugar and sweetness from like a pale malt that we use, and then with that rye, it gets that nice color, that nice brown ale color. A lot lighter than a stout, but darker.
Yeah.
He's got to move on.
They're all really pretty.
I like the way you serve.
No.
Here you go.
I love that you always keep something in my hand.
I keep moving. Well,
So vacation.
I'm a good host. Let me put this.
Yeah, that's true.
Rude
Right,
ass.
yeah.
She has a lot of experience in the,
Right.
in the
Yeah.
services.
What's that?
So that would be your citrus and coriander on the nose.
What's this one called?
This is called the vacation.
Vacation.
And
I
this
can
is an
totally smell the
interesting-
citrus.
You are now on vacation.
Oh my god.
Now we had this beer is an interesting one because we use a traditional brewing method for this that is called a step mash. Something that's not common in other breweries and definitely not common in the industry as a whole. But this beer has a lot of malted wheat and raw wheat, as well as rice hulls to create a lot of body and to create that wheat character. And we use coriander in the boil. In the last 5 minutes, we throw in almost a pound of coriander.
Wow.
Nice.
And
Which is so aromatic. I
Yeah.
love coriander.
especially when you walk by the brew house after it's been
You
added.
can smell it.
You can smell it, and then we use an orange infusion in the fermentation so that you get that citrus quality.
What'd you think?
Well, I find that with a lot of them, and that being I had to take a second sip and see, but I find like at first I take it and I'm like, oh, I like this, and then I'm like, oh, and then I'm like a 5-year-old. I'm like, yeah. So it ends bitter. Like it starts with all the good stuff, and then it ends with something I don't care for as much.
Well, and part of it too, you have to remember that when something is carbonated, that is carbonic acid. Okay, so CO2 or bubbling, like champagne or sparkling wine, is the same way.
Well, I love that.
It creates kind of a little bit of a bitter characteristic, or it accentuates bitter characteristics as well. So that's always something to keep in mind too. Like, and that's most noticeable towards the back of your palate. So that's something to keep in mind on beer too. That could be part of it.
Yeah,
but,
that makes sense.
Again, it's just not
Makes
everybody
sense.
likes.
Completely. I don't like
everything.
grapefruit. Like I don't. Bitter is just not my thing.
Right,
Except for espresso. So go figure. And dark chocolate. Can we talk about food pairings as we try this last one, which
Sure.
is what?
So this is the hop dealer,
Oh,
which
no.
is
Back to dinner.
oh no, she said. Hop dealer is our flagship IPA. The wood is not exactly our flagship; it's a specialty that we do once a year.
Oh, it
seasonally.
smells amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that would be the hops that you dislike so much.
Well, apparently I want to
Say
wear
you're
it
sorry.
as perfume.
Say you're sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Now the hops there,
Right,
it's,
yeah.
Circle moment.
It smells
citrus
flowery
and
again.
grapefruit, so you get a little bit of floral notes. And
And grapefruit. It smells
Yeah.
totally like grapefruit.
Very tropical.
Maybe I'll share it with you at
So
some
this
point.
Kate
This
has
is,
yet to hand the glass over to me, people.
I'm still smelling it.
I would call this a West Coast IPA. It has a juiciness that, and hoppiness that's characteristic of the West Coast. We also use the big C hops in this, which is North American hops.
I don't think it's hops that I don't like then, because I actually do like that. There is a bitter finish, but it's a clean bitter, if you know what I
Yeah,
mean.
yep.
And the floralness and the grapefruitness of the
Yeah.
first part
Well,
is
if it's done
I
right.
like
But
it.
different hops give different
Of course.
smells, and like it's much like grape varieties. Like there may be some grape varieties that you don't like. Hops are very much the same way. Like
I always
That's a
thought it was
great-
one thing, like barley is a
no.
thing. Or maybe
Think
there's
of
barley
it in the
varieties
same
too.
way as like Chardonnay versus Riesling,
Oh.
Chardonnay versus Gewürztraminer.
That's
I
an
had
amazing way to think
no
about it.
idea.
You know, Cabernet versus Zinfandel, like same type of thing.
Wow.
It's in essence the same general species or
They're the
Yeah.
same basic.
Yeah.
They are. They're
Yeah.
the same, it's the same type of plant. It's just there are many strains.
There's varieties. I
And
had
in
no
America,
idea.
we have the big 7
Like marijuana.
Cs.
You said it was like akin to marijuana, right? There's strains there.
Yep.
So we have the, in this beer we use nugget hops for bittering additions, and then we use Cascade and Citra for aroma, and we dry hop with Cascade and Citra as well. So the Citra hop is a proprietary blend. Cascade hops get their name from the Cascade region of the world, the Cascade Mountain Range in the Pacific
Wow.
Northwest. So we have a lot of interesting hops. I would say very much so that's an American IPA because it's all American.
So one of your questions was about food pairings.
Yes.
I was going to go next,
Yeah, and so, kind of a rule of thumb, like the old rule of thumb with wine was kind of, white meat with white wine and red meats with red wine. And, obviously that's kind of going by the wayside a little bit. But, if you wanted to take it down to its core, I would say, again, kind of lighter, as a whole, lighter fare with lighter beers. Now the exception being like something with hops, like the hop dealer that we finished with here, that has that bitter, mid palate, and those beers in particular, hop centric beers, tend to go very well with spicy cuisine.
I
Like
could
things
see
like
that.
Indian,
That makes sense.
Thai, kind of anything, because they have that aroma and that perfumey thing. Like when I mean, I'm a huge Thai food fan, so like that, I think a lot of that, like jasmine rice and things like that, where they're super aromatic, that plays really well into that vein.
In many ways, beer is more food friendly than wine. In many ways, because beer, there's only really one ingredient in wine. As far as beer, though, there's 4, and also the potential for adjuncts such as spices and fruits and various other things that will lend it. Like we used oak flower in that other beer, and
Which I
that
also
would,
liked. I like the florally ones, I think.
Well, that changes the potential for food pairing. And with this, we have beer is very, very much meant to be consumed with food. You are, for example, a charcuterie board
That's interesting.
with meat and cheese and beer, like we were saying earlier.
Much better than
Or a nice heavy meaty sandwich with a nice rich beer. Those things pair well together.
I think a great way to explain it is you have to think of beer as bread. So like when you were eating a dish, or or you're thinking about a dish that you're making, what kind of bread would you put with that?
Right.
I get that. Yeah.
You see what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
a lot of the same character. I mean, you're basically beer is just liquid bread. I mean, that's really
With hops.
Yes,
With
with
hops.
hops.
With hops.
I mean, that's yeast, water, and grain. So it's a very similar type product.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what I always try to keep in mind for myself is like, okay, do I want more, something more like a rye, or like more of a French bread, and like a baguette type of thing with this dish. That's kind of a real simple way that kind of everybody can understand, because most people have had several different types of bread, and if you haven't really experienced beer, I think that's a great way to think about it. Kind of like basil or rosemary,
Right.
or like those type of things. That's kind of what hops does for beer.
Right.
You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's kind of more of that a little bit more that vegetal,
Right.
that's the kind of characteristic that
Like
you're
an
dealing with.
influencer.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Do
But
people
can be pretty dramatic.
brew beer?
If you overdo it.
I'm sorry.
Do people ever use cannabis in brewing beer?
Well,
since it's a relative
okay.
of hops?
It's funny that so many people are asking me this since
No
I became a
comment.
head brewer.
Do you guys know the show Bong Appetit? Have you seen this show?
I have not seen that, but
It's
now I'm extremely intrigued.
Fine chefs, it's on Vice Network. Fine high-level chefs are making these meals with all these different cannabis products, and there's tinctures and this and flakes and crystals, and they use CBD to tone it down, and like it's an amazing thing. Like, is that happening here?
It doesn't happen in beer right now, and
just
part of the
curious.
reason is because we can't. And
Here,
Can't speak for Colorado, honestly, but in Michigan.
Are they
not going
are
on
they
in
doing it
Colorado.
in
there are
Colorado?
recipes that exist that people are doing that have marijuana in them, and that's not something that we're going to pursue, but that is
I'm
something.
just curious conceptually about whether it's a
It is-
thing and
oh, it's
possible.
totally possible.
Because
Oh,
it's so
100%
floral. I
possible.
mean, there's
Yeah.
seems like there's a lot of
Very-
potential
it's a
there.
very
The difference
similar type of
is
product.
Yeah.
with marijuana is that there's a certain level that you reach with THC where it burns off. And we can't necessarily add it to the boil or have it in the boil for very long before the marijuana no longer has the desired effect,
Yeah,
the drug-related
yeah, yeah.
effect.
That makes
Now, we
sense.
can use it as an additive for flavor, or we can use it as a way to
Like almost
impose
infusion,
a flavor.
right? I would
Now, we
think.
could certainly add marijuana as like a dry hop into a fermenter, and that's possible. But again, it's not something we're going to do, and it's not something I really want to do right now. But
Just curious.
It is possible. But here's the thing about that, because marijuana is not just the only thing that's possible with beer. There are so many things about beer, and there are so many things about what's happening in the industry that, one, make me excited and inspire me, because we can make beer now that crosses guidelines and crosses style preferences that we can never make 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago, or 100 years ago.
And that's really the big difference, I think, is where beers come, at least from my perspective. Right? I grew up with thinking Bud Light's the thing, you know, and all that stuff. So this is what's really wonderful about beer in the last
We're at a very exciting time in the evolution of beer.
What 5 things are always on your grocery list and why?
I had to write this down. Okay. 1, cheese. Because
As if we needed more reasons to love you.
oh well, cheese and beer actually go very well together.
Really?
I've always thought, yes, absolutely. Cheese and beer and smoked meats or preserved meats like sausages and things like
Well, that
that.
makes sense when you think of Germany. That's what they eat, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
and those types of things. Actually, beer is something there was a question on here about food pairings.
Yeah.
And so of course cheese and beer are always on my grocery list.
Okay.
Especially new beer I've never had before, and
course.
cheeses that I haven't had before.
Yes.
And then produce, of course, because you got to have the healthy balance with
Yep.
vegetables and fruit. Dog food, because I have 2 dogs I love. And, they always need to get food when I go get food.
Do they get to come to work with you?
No, I don't think that's okay. But it might.
Not in a hurry. Yeah.
Health regulations,
Yeah.
all those pesky laws.
But
Yeah.
hey, there's plenty of places the dogs can run,
Yeah.
and so we go to the lake a lot. So.
That's cool.
And then my significant other and I, we have a little bit of different tastes, but we both love chocolate. So for chocolate is always on the list.
Nice.
If I go by myself, I get a text message, make sure you buy chocolate.
Like Malcolm's left the house by himself.
Yes. I'm like, I'm not going to forget. So
We're good.
That's almost a borderline Bible diet. You know, when you
Right.
think of beer as liquid bread, you've got beer, cheese,
produce,
right?
but not dog food. Dog food wasn't. So, and then chocolate. Chocolate.
Final question here. End of days. Something's happened.
Uh-oh.
You're being evacuated to an island. 1 to-go cup. What's in it?
Really?
Malcolm.
Do I have other liquids to drink wherever I go?
No.
So I have 1 cup
One
to live
to-go
off of?
cup to fill.
Yeah. It's your last drink. What are you having? Well, this is probably an easier one for myself and Malcolm, being that this is the family brewery here. So, and while I've had a ton of great stuff, I would honestly say that the hop dealer right now would probably be my go-to.
That was my absolutely hands down my favorite.
Yeah, great.
Like
That was really
I
great.
could possibly drink
But
that. I don't know
you
if it's
know,
because it was my
given
last
a
one
whole
of the
room
day
full of
also.
choices, you know.
There's millions of choices.
Right,
out there.
yeah.
That's an impossible question.
Malcolm,
Right.
Malcolm, I feel like you're sweating over your clipboard.
Right.
Yeah, oh my God.
He takes it seriously.
I know, I
I
get
do.
it.
I take, and the whole thing I take seriously.
All right.
But if I'm going to pick any of the beers out of my top 5, I would say that 60-minute IPA by Dogfish Head. I would take to.
And that's a great.
And it's
yeah.
a phenomenal beer. It's
Okay.
100% a great IPA. They do their 90-minute.
What's an IPA? Is it a lager or an ale?
It would be an ale.
Yep.
India Pale Ale.
India
okay.
And the 1 to-go cup. There's just so many things.
So
I would
disappointing.
take.
So
I know.
How can I do that? I just take a 6-pack.
Malcolm,
I'll take water just to make it easy. Yeah.
Circling back to how we started this interview,
Sure.
you just provided a lot of people with a lot of comfort and a lot of love
There you go. There you go.
with what to take away at end of
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
guys.
Thank you
It was
guys
our pleasure.
so
Yeah, thank you
much.
Appreciate it.
Such a pleasure. Thank
Thank you.
you.